Chapter 15. Good news. Thanksgiving came and went quietly, and although there was turkey at the mess hall, somehow all the sadness that had come to Emmy's family kept Yuki from feeling very festive. Ken, too, seemed discouraged and bitter. What's there to be thankful for this year? He asked. For being alive and well and together, Mother answered, but Ken didn't seem to care. Then the telegram came from Father, suddenly bringing them the cheering news they had longed to hear. Being released on parole, it said. We'll join you soon. Love, Dad. Yahoo! Yuki shouted at the top of her voice. Maybe Papa will be home for Christmas. She didn't care if everyone in the whole barrack heard her through the sheet-rock walls. She hugged Mother and danced around the room and rumpled up Ken's hair before he could object. For the next few days, whenever there was a knock at the door, Yuki ran to open it, wondering if Father would be standing there. But each time it was only a neighbor or a friend coming to ask if they'd had any further word from Father, or it was the mailman with a package from outside. Yuki wasn't too disappointed when it was a package that arrived instead of Father. Those from Mimi and Mrs. Jameson were the most fun. Mimi's package was filled with presents for each of them, as well as evergreen branches that smelled of Christmas and green forests and colored paper and ribbon to make decorations for the branches. So you can make your own Christmas tree, Mimi wrote. Mrs. Jameson's package contained sugared nuts, homemade cookies, and a fruitcake filled with spices and nuts and raisins. Yuki could almost feel the warmth of Mrs. Jameson's cozy house as she sniffed the spicy, delicious scents of her package, and she longed for a glimpse of her old neighbor rummaging about her bulging closets looking for something interesting to show Yuki. Christmas in camp was a far cry from Christmas at home, but still it wasn't too terrible. The mess halls were decorated by the kitchen crews with red and green crepe paper. There were special programs at church and school, and it was fun singing carols in the school chorus. Now, if only Father could be back by Christmas, Yuki thought, everything would be almost perfect. It was the day before Christmas, and Yuki woke up feeling good. Her cot, surrounded by its monk's cloth curtain, was warm and snug, and she could hear the fire crackling to life in the pot-bellied stove, and the kettle on top of it was beginning to hum. Yuki stretched and took a deep breath. Mimi's evergreens filled the room with a good Christmas-like smell. For once she had awakened before the cook pounded his spoon on the dishpan to tell everybody in Block 7 that breakfast was ready, and she wouldn't have to rush to the mess hall before it closed. You know something, Mama? She called out over her curtain. I have a funny feeling Papa might come back today. Mother sounded cheerful. I had the same feeling myself when I woke up, she answered brightly. Maybe it's a good sign. Unlike Emmy's grandmother, who felt good and bad signs in almost everything, Yuki's feelings rarely turned out to be much more than wishful thinking. If she and Mother both had the same feeling, though, she reflected, maybe it was a good sign. Maybe if she tried Mrs. Kurihawa's system of willing things to happen, it really might. Papa will come home today, she said, over and over to herself. He will. He will. It was like a Christmas miracle. 5 minutes after they returned from breakfast, a messenger came from the administration office. Your father's back, he said as soon as Yuki opened the door. He's being processed, and I've come to take you to the ad building. Come on, let's go. Yuki and Ken whooped together and scrambled for their jackets while Mother hurried into her coat and put on her scarf. None of them bothered with their boots. Although the roads were slushy with mud and snow, they hurried outside, gasping at the icy wind, and climbed into the truck. Ken had to sit outside in the back, but he didn't mind. He pulled his knit cap over his ears, shoved his hands into his pockets, and called out, "Let's go!" He would be late for work at the hospital, but he didn't care about that either. Yuki was the first to spot Father. "Papa!" she shouted. She ran to him, throwing herself around his neck. He was thin, and he looked tired after the long trip from Montana, but he smiled happily at the sight of her. "You're back, Papa!" Yuki shouted happily. "You're really back!" "It's been a long time," Father said as he hugged each of them. "You all look fine. Mama, you look a little thin." "You do too, Papa-san." "And Kenichi," Father said, turning to Ken. "Have you been a good substitute for me?" Ken grinned sheepishly. "I tried, at least for a while," he admitted, knowing that he hadn't done such a good job since coming to Topaz. "Sure, I'm glad you're back to take over." "Yuki-chan," Father Father said, gazing fondly at her. I believe you've grown a little. Half an inch up and about 2 inches around, Yuki informed him. It's all the potatoes and rice and macaroni they gave us in camp. But Father didn't care if Yuki was fat or if Ken had been a poor substitute. He was back with his family after the long months of isolation in Montana, and they all knew it would be the best Christmas they'd had in many years. That night, their small barrack room was so crowded with friends and neighbors that Mother had to push back all the monks' cloth dividers so people could sit on the cots and even on the floor. Their church friends had come, and of course, Emmy's grandmother. They brought cookies and candy and fruit saved from the mess hall, and Mr. Toda even produced a precious tin of coffee, telling Father that it was the first happy day he'd had since the war broke out. Father didn't stop talking from the moment he got back. There was so much to tell about the prisoner of war camp where he'd been interned. He told about the 30 below Montana winter with the giant icicles that ran from the roof to the ground. He told of the loneliness, even though there were 30 men in each barrack, and he told of how they had kept busy. And he told of how they kept busy with work duty and by forming all sorts of classes. He told them, too, how their mail was censored and how they could receive nothing wrapped in paper for fear that secret messages would be smuggled in. It seemed almost like the busy, happy days back in Berkeley, and Mother served tea and crackers and spam and cheese that she had found at the canteen. She had been planning the party ever since Father's telegram arrived, and she spared nothing to make it a festive occasion. Carolers from the church were going up and down the streets, filling the night air with Christmas music, and Yuki went outside to listen to them. They sang of joy to the world and peace on earth, and at this moment, Yuki felt filled with joy herself. Her own small world seemed safe and secure again, and although she knew there was no peace in the world, there seemed to be a small sliver of it in her life tonight. She looked toward the lights of the camp hospital shining in the darkness, and thinking of Emmy lying there in her cot, she hurried back inside. She found a small tin box and filled it with cookies and fruitcake, nuts and candy, and tied a spray of evergreen on it with red ribbon. Tomorrow she would take it to Emmy. She wasn't going to let anyone stop her from seeing her friend. In the meantime, there was still tonight to be enjoyed, and pulling up a chair, Yuki sat as close to her father as she could get. When Yuki got to the hospital the next day, the nurse in charge was firm and unyielding. You may wave to your friend from the glass partition, she said crisply. I'll see that she gets your package. But it's Christmas, Yuki objected. Can I go in for just a minute? I'll give her your greetings, the nurse answered firmly. Yuki knew when she was defeated. She moved to the glass partition and waved to Emmy. She mouthed a big, Merry Christmas, and held up her package so Emmy could see. She pointed to the nurse's back, wrinkled her nose, and said a few more things by sign language. Emmy leaned back on her pillow, giggling and signaling back. She no longer looked pale and sickly, but pink-cheeked and healthy. In fact, she scarcely looked sick at all. Come home soon, Yuki said, waving again, and then she left her package with the nurse and headed for home. Merry Christmas anyway, she called back to the nurse as she left. Yuki ran all the way back to Block 7. No north wind stung her nose and ears, but she scarcely felt it, for already she was thinking of the Christmas dinner at the mess hall. Besides that, the new red sweater that Mother had knit for her was soft and warm beneath her heavy jacket, and the Angora mittens for Mimi kept her fingers from getting too cold. There was a turkey for Christmas dinner, with as many of the trimmings as wartime rationing allowed. Ordinarily, they were each allowed 39 cents a day, but Yuki knew today would be very special. The food was even served to them family style at the tables, so they needn't stand in line. Ever since Mr. Kuriawa's death, Emmy's grandmother always ate with them, so she now seemed part of the family. Mother had also invited Mr. Toda to have Christmas dinner with them, so with Father there and Ken eating with them for a change, it seemed almost like a holiday back home. I wonder what we'll be doing next Christmas, Ken mused, between mouthfuls of sweet potato. We'll be back home by then, I hope, Yuki said quickly. Ken, however, remained serious. It all depends on the war, he answered. It was as though he knew something that she didn't, and Yuki felt a tinge of sadness come over her happiness. She didn't ever want her family to be separated again. She wanted somehow to hold on to everybody who sat around her at the table this minute, so they would always be close and near and part of her life. But in that circle of warmth and laughter, Ken seemed strangely silent and apart. It was almost as though he were slipping away from her already.